All right, so I know that we tend to cover a lot of negative stories on this channel, but I do have a little bit of good news that can hopefully be uplifting to some people and give us a little bit of hope of what could be accomplished here in the United States if we are to follow in the model of exactly what Berlin just did. In Germany, they have now backed a referendum to seize properties from mega landlords in order to give them more affordable housing options in the city. So this is just absolutely fantastic from top to bottom. It's a non-binding resolution, but we're going to get into some of the details here. They say here from Vice, up to 240,000 properties could be expropriated from landlords after voters overwhelmingly backed a non-binding referendum aimed at tackling the housing crisis in Germany's capital. So there are obviously differences between the United States and Germany and our housing markets and how they function. The United States here, we basically have a completely eviscerated public housing system. Okay, it's completely underfunded, it is under-equipped and under-resourced, and it's something that we need to be investing substantially more in. We should be building more high-quality public housing, more community-owned public housing, so that we don't have millions of homeless people who are sleeping out on the streets in the wealthiest nation in the world. And something that we could also do, instead of just building public housing from the ground up, is exactly this: expropriating properties that gigantic corporations or mega landlords are simply just sitting on to maintain the value of, or who are turning around and trying to price gouge people and driving up the cost of housing for everybody. So here are some of the details on exactly what they did. So in Berlin, voters have overwhelmingly backed a radical proposal to take properties away from some of Berlin's biggest landlords and put them into public ownership. Just over 56% of people voted in favor of a referendum calling on authorities in the German capital to expropriate flats and apartments from all landlords who own more than 3,000 properties. And in total, 1,749,923 valid votes were cast, with 1,034,709 votes in favor of the referendum's motion and 715,214 against. So pretty overwhelming vote when we're talking about what we're actually talking about. I mean, could you imagine if they were to bring this to a vote here in the United States, the massive lobbying blitz, the mainstream media coverage of something like this? They would be bringing out all of the anti-communist and anti-socialist rhetoric that you could possibly imagine. But in Germany, you know, they overwhelmingly won this vote, right, by 300,000 or more votes in the city of Berlin. So, and again, that's to expropriate properties from landlords owning more than 3,000 properties. So we're not talking about, you know, mom and pop landlords who own one or two properties that they are living on or retiring on, right? We're talking about gigantic mega corporations and billionaires who own these properties and again are doing nothing but driving up the cost for everybody else. And so they continue, and I'm going to butcher this name, but campaign group Deutsche Wohnen and Company Enteignen, which helped organize the referendum, said it could lead up to 240,000 apartments being bought off mega landlords, which represents around 15% of Berlin's total housing stock. And they continue saying the referendum was able to take place after this group took advantage of a mechanism in German law which allows certain topics to go to a referendum if a group can collect 175,000 signatures from city residents. And in June, campaigners announced that they had collected 343,000 signatures on the housing referendum, which received a boost when a citywide rent cap was overturned in April. So that just gives you a little bit of the context as to how they were able to amass this amount of signatures. And I mean, 343,000 signatures is a fuck ton of signatures to get on a ballot initiative like this, to just bring it for a referendum. And then to have millions of people, over 1 million people show up to vote is even bigger. But they continue saying that the next stage for the campaign is likely to be the German High Court, where landlord organizations are expected to claim that the expropriation of properties would violate German constitutional law, something that they dispute, obviously. And the referendum took place against the backdrop of a dramatic federal election as Germans decided who would replace Angela Merkel as chancellor after 16 years in office. Just take a pause for a second. Angela Merkel was the head of Germany for 16 years. 16 goddamn years. I mean, listen, if you were going to apply that same standard, right, being reelected and reelected to be the leader of a country like that, imagine how they talk about somebody like Evo Morales, right, who was exactly in this same position as Angela Merkel, won re-election multiple times over and was in office for more than a decade. And what does the U.S. turn around and call him? They call him an authoritarian, a dictator. So I just think it's funny that somebody like Angela Merkel can be in power for 16 years and nobody in the Western world even questions it. But the second that a socialist leader spends even more than a couple years in office, then suddenly they're calling them a dictator and authoritarian. But they continue saying that the center-left SDP has emerged as the largest party because of these elections, overtaking Merkel's CDU and the CSU. And the SDP's Olaf Scholz will now attempt to form a coalition government with the Greens and the Liberals to become the next chancellor of Germany. And quote, Regardless of its composition, the future government coalition will have to implement the socialization of housing corporations, said Kuziak. The demand for socialization unites far more voices behind it than any party. We Berliners have decided nobody is allowed to speculate with our apartments. So there you go. Just a little bit of good news, right? This is what is possible when people are allowed to engage in a democratic process. We do have laws here in the United States that allow us to bring forward things for public votes in local or even state elections in the same way. But, this is the type of shit that we should be looking to do here in the United States. We have a housing crisis, right? There's not a single county in the entire United States where somebody can reasonably afford rent on a minimum wage salary, okay? So if that's the housing situation that we have right now, clearly housing is not affordable, and the way that you make housing affordable is by either building new public housing or by creating new public housing by seizing them from some of these gigantic corporations. Here, the first one that comes to mind in my head is BlackRock, right? I mean, one of these gigantic financial firms that is currently buying up all of these houses, which is driving up the price for everybody else, and basically pricing middle-class homeowners out of the housing market, including obviously working-class people who are forced to largely rent in a disproportionate way. And housing ownership is the main way that Americans build up wealth in this country. So listen, we need to implement social housing policies like this, right? We can completely eradicate homelessness and have it be economically effective, as we learned from, I think it was Norway or Finland. One of these countries, one of these Nordic countries managed to completely eradicate homelessness, and it ended up saving them money, because when you address problems at the root cause and you address them in an upfront way, then you're not having to deal with the costs associated with letting these problems fester and continue to go unresolved as time continues. So this is exactly what we need to be looking towards. Let's take an example from Berlin here and move to Socialize, the U.S. housing market.